and turning that into a patient magnet. So as Laura mentioned, that's what we're going to be discussing today. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, what are we going to cover today? So we're going to be talking about how AI is changing search. I'm going to go through a Google business profile, give you a little bit of a walkthrough, a live demo, touch on Reserve with Google, and then make sure you stick around for the end where I share my Google business profile tips and tricks. So exciting stuff today. Also, I forgot to mention, if you see a little bit of scrape on my face. Played some tennis this past weekend, and the tennis court got the better of me. But just wanted to address that. So perfect. Let's go ahead and dive into how AI is changing search. Okay, the AI search shift. I'm sure, as everyone is aware, as I am, all I've heard about in the past 18 months, year, 6 months is AI, especially as it relates to the world of digital marketing and local SEO, and specifically as it relates to dental practices and dental marketing. So there's been a lot of talk about this, a lot of changes as it relates to the landscape that revolves around that. So let's kind of dive into some of those and learn a little bit more about that in detail. So initially, looking at the traditional patient journey, how that was originally structured. So as you see here, you had a new patient who was looking for, a dental office, dental practice. How they would find that, they would go to Google, Bing, Yellow Pages, word of mouth, direct mail, street signage, referrals, and then book the appointment through that way. So those are kind of the traditional patient journey. And as it looks in today's day and age, the new patient journey, a lot of those same tools or same methods are popular. That's one thing I wanted to point out on this slide is we're still seeing the majority of patients find dental practices through the traditional methods, especially Google. That one's obviously the one that dominates the most. But we are still seeing the majority of those patients come from these traditional methods. So something I wanted to point out there as well. But then also you have all these new AI tools and LLMs, large language models like Gemini, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, things of that nature, where patients are finding dental practices through these new avenues and AI tools. So definitely something to be aware of and to be cognizant of within today's day and age. And a lot of the patients that we see for our clients and in general that have converted via these large language models are definitely more high converting. So they're spending a lot more time doing research on them, but they're a lot more likely to convert. So the number may be a little bit lower, but it is something that is increasing as we see more and more patients come from these new tools and whatnot. Perfect. So some data here to kind of touch on this and back this up. Questions that might have traditionally gone to Google, whether it's seeking technical help, seeking information or practical guidance. Kind of looking at some of these conversations, specifically at ChatGPT, sampled a million of these conversations, and some of them are going to these LLMs to find these answers that maybe in the past they would have gone straight to Google. So definitely some data here to back up the starting a shift from traditional Google search to these large language models. And how I like to kind of describe and touch on or give a high overview of like what a large language model is, like a ChatGPT or Gemini. I kind of like to think of it as a giant brain trained on trillions of words. Its primary job is to predict the next word in a sequence, to create text. And think of it as like it's an extremely well-read scholar who has memorized a library, but doesn't really have a live map of what's happening outside the building right now. So that's kind of how I like to think about these large language models, specifically ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, and things of that nature. Looking at how these information is kind of broken up in terms of the use of these. Obviously, as you can see, the arrows are pointing to a couple of specific things that relate, directly to local SEO and the dentistry industry. So, researching a topic, answering factual questions and recommendations. People could be utilizing these tools for researching, specific treatment options like dental implants or, sedation dentistry, veneers, teeth whitening, whatever it is. And then the answering factual questions recommendation section could be people just simply looking up, these dentists within their area, whether they're looking, based on location, or they want to see a dentist that have a specific amount of reviews or a specific rating of reviews. They're utilizing these large language models to kind of find that information and whatnot. Perfect. Next thing I wanted to touch on here is utilizing and kind of looking at the difference between, Google search before the introduction of, AI overviews and AI and generative AI. And then I'll touch on the quote unquote old SERP, or the old SERP, excuse me, and the new SERP, which I don't, it fluctuates, but we all are kind of aware of what it used to look like before AI was built into Google search. You had the search bar up above where it was the All On X implant dentures, Nashville. This is the keyword, a good example here. And then right below it, you'd have the local search results or your map pack. This is where your Google Business Profile information will display, and the results are driven by, wherever the searcher is located and the optimization of your Google Business Profile. And then directly below that, the 10 blue organic links. This is where your website information would display, and the results are, driven by content and SEO optimization. So this is, traditionally what Google search looked like, but in today's day and age with AI, here's the quote unquote new SERP. So still has the search up above, but directly below it is the AI overview, which essentially is something that was released in 2024. And what it does is summarizes, the content from multiple sources, often, the top ranking websites. And what's really interesting about this, and certainly can be, frustrating for, anyone who utilizes this, is you can look up, the same search, All On X implant dentures Nashville, and you can look this up on a Tuesday, let's say, and you see your website or your Google Business Profile show up in those AI overviews, but then you could look the next day and it may not even be there. There may not even be an AI overview. So there's definitely still some randomness as it relates to Google and their implementation of AI into their search. So there's not a whole lot of cohesiveness, which can be frustrating, but in the world of SEO and digital marketing, that's just kind of par for the course. So something to be known there. And even if if things are cited within the AI overview, sometimes the link is there, sometimes it's not. So definitely something to be aware of. It's not very consistent. And a lot of the information we see too is, you have the search, you have the AI overview, and then all the way down below here, below the people also ask and whatnot, you have the organic traditional listings. And so as you can see from that data point there, the click-through rate on organic listings drops pretty heavily when AI overviews are present. So definitely something to be aware of, in a trend that we are seeing as it relates to more and more of these AI overviews showing up in the Google search. As it goes hand in hand with that kind of transitions me into the next topic, very similar to staying on AI overviews and zero-click searches and the death of the click-through, which is I like that description. Might be a little dramatic, but that's okay. As I explained, AI overviews, Cliff Notes version of the internet is a good example of, I found, on how best to describe it. And then zero-click searches is a search where you can get your answer without ever having to click on a website. So that's something we're seeing a lot. People are finding these answers, without ever having to go on a website. They're, finding the information and either calling directly from there, or some of that traffic is being moved to the Google Business Profile. So, which relates perfectly to what we're talking about today, and how, visibility is more and more about being selected, not just ranking for certain keywords, which I think is super prevalent, and kind of leads us into the next topic. I know the last data point I wanted to make here on AI overviews is they are definitely on the rise. So as you can see from this Search Engine Journal and from SEMrush, the data from November 2025 obviously showing an increase in the amount of queries that are triggering AI overviews in Google search. So definitely something that's not going away, something you need to stay on top of and be made aware of, but definitely something important to be known. Now we're getting to the meat and the potatoes, the main reason why everyone is here today, to talk about Google Business Profile, why it's so important in 2026, and all of that good stuff. So we're going to dive right into what is a Google Business Profile. Pretty easy explanation here. Free listing that allows owners to manage how their business appears across Google Search and Google Maps. Great way to describe it is, I like to say, it's a digital storefront where users either search directly for your business name, or they search specific services that you provide, whether that be, teeth whitening in Charlotte, or, dentures in Denver, whatever it may be. People are searching, and that's the way they're going to find you. This has become increasingly more and more important as AI becomes more and more embedded into the digital marketing space and Google search and all of those AI tools and those LLMs. Since we're seeing the AI search integration and it's not going anywhere, a lot of those LLMs and Google search are pulling data directly from your Google Business Profile. So it's really important that you have all of the correct information. You're optimizing this so that when patients find you, they're able to make sure that they can get in touch with you and book appointments and all of that good stuff. Additionally, the local pack, which I talked about, it still shows up for searches in Google search, and that information pulls directly. It shows your Google Business Profile, and you can't show up in the local pack in Google without having a verified Google Business Profile. So definitely something important to note there. And then, as I've touched on previously, the zero-click searches, that information is being pulled from the Google Business Profile. So want to make sure that you're optimizing that to its most to the max, I guess is a good way to put it. And so what I thought would be a good way to kind of go through and look at this is to dive into a real Google Business Profile listing. I'll give you kind of a high level overview, go through some of the main points within a Google Business Profile, and then I'll touch on at the end, afterwards, the importance of it, why I just spent, this time walking through that profile, just because it is, there definitely is a reason for me to show you all of this information. So I'm going to step in and show you a real Google Business Profile. Okay, so as you can see, this is one of our clients here at Great Dental Websites. This is the back end of their Google Business Profile. As you can see, they're located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I'm just going to kind of walk through, try and be as succinct as I can, because I know this can be repetitive sometimes, but I'll walk through and show you what this looks like. Okay, perfect. All right. Initially, can you still see my screen?
All right. So what I see is your Canva presentation.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go to the share,
Yep.
you might have to re-click.
Yep. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay.
There's no questions so far. I keep checking the chat and the Q&A
Okay.
box so far.
Okay.
I'll
Perfect.
chime in if I see anything, okay?
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Hopefully we can see my screen now.
Yes, I see the business information page.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. All right. Google Business Profile. Here's a live look at it. As I said, this is the Blake Nelson DDS Cosmetic Implant and Sedation Dentistry. Want to make sure the name is the same throughout the entire process, whether that's on your website or citations. Looking at the business categories, their main category here is cosmetic dentist. This is their primary. You can select up to 10 categories here. If you offer all these services, great. The more information you can provide here, the better. You can select up to 10. Moving down to the description, make sure you include here something I wanted to touch on is if there's a way to make your business, stand out or unique, include that here in the description. If there's a certain service that you only do in your area, or if there's, a way that something special in your dental office, include that here. Obviously, this practice, their focus, is on preventive dentistry. They highlight that, but they also highlight that they offer emergency dentistry as an option too. So something to be aware of in this. And then opening date, pretty straightforward here. Contact information, obviously include your phone number, chat. This is important as well. You can add a WhatsApp or a text message. Depending on your audience and the age of your patient these days, feels like people are more and more comfortable or want to chat with someone rather than talk to them on the phone. So if you do have this as an option, definitely include that here. People want to get in contact with you. And then looking at the website link here. So it shows this, this is the link to the homepage of the website. And additionally, as you'll see here, there is a UTM connected to this. I'm going to touch on the importance of that kind of towards the end in my tips and tricks and why it's important to include this within the website link. So something I'll touch on later. And then your social profiles, obviously your Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you can add a LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. If you have these, great, include these in here. People want to get a holistic view of your dentistry. They want to see, who their dentist is going to be, what the office looks like, what the people are going to be, working on their teeth are up to. So as many of these as you had, great, include them. People want to see this, and Google loves to see these as well. Same thing with the menu and services link. As you can see, it goes directly to the services page for this client. Has the UTM, which I said I'll touch on in kind of the tips and tricks section towards the end here, but want to make sure you have that correct link in there. Looking at the location and areas, obviously put the business address here. One thing I did want to note is if you are located in not a standalone location, like if you are in a building that is shared with another office or something to that same extent, in terms of where to put the pin, as you can see here, you can move around the pin. I would put the pin closest to the entrance as possible. So then people know exactly, it might not be where your business is located exactly in terms of the floor, but wherever the entrance is to that business, I've found is the easiest way for people to not get confused and still find your business if it's in a shared area. Service areas, obviously they're located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That's included here. Nearby cities, include those as well. And then if there's specific neighborhoods that patients are coming from, include that. Obviously, you can see like Haines, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. You want to include that as a location there, something to note because people have specific neighborhoods in cities that they find and search from. So want to include those. Moving on to the hours, obviously, make sure your hours are always correct. People don't want to go to a dentist's office, obviously, if they say they're open, but then they're closed. Something I'll touch on in a little bit more detail in the tips and tricks section as well. And then special hours. Similarly, if there's hours you're closed, include those here. I'll touch on those in a second. And then looking more at the more section, there's a lot of details that have been added to this within kind of recently, past 6 months to a year. Obviously, if any of these you identify with, select them. If not, you can just leave those blank. Same goes for like the accessibility portion, amenities, things of that nature, children. If you have these, available to patients, include it. The more information, the better. Patients love to see it. Google likes to see it as well. Same goes for, the crowd section. And then this one is relatively new within the past year. I think Google has added this. If you have these offerings of sedation dentistry or pediatric care, cosmetic dentistry, emergency services, definitely want to add those as well. And then payment section, obviously a lot of options to include here. whichever one you do offer, include those. Nothing about insurance here. Google doesn't have that option, but want to include as many details as you can. And then this is a new one that honestly just popped up within the past 2 weeks. Let people know where they can chat with you. If you have these, obviously select them. And then kind of last two portions here. If you require an appointment, check that. Service options, if you offer language assistance, if there's someone in your office or you speak a different language, include that here. People love to see that. And then the on-site service is available. Check that one as well. I think that's something that was added during COVID, but obviously since it's a dental practice, there are services online. So you want to include that as well.
All right. Before we leave this page, I'll say we had one quick question in the Q&A box
Yeah.
about how can we see the service areas on our Google page and or website?
Yeah. Great question. So if you're on the back end of your Google business profile, if that's what you're referencing, if you're in this edit profile section and you scroll down to location, that's where you can find the different service areas in your area. And if you click on this little, you can search the area, add in whatever location you are looking for. But that's where the service areas are located, if that makes sense.
No. So the service areas, so let's say if someone's searching from those zip codes, then that's where you show up if you're servicing them.
Yeah.
Would that be correct? Like it's kind of like an outline of where you would show up in people's searches.
Yeah. So those are just areas that, if customers, are they searching in your area? If they're in this area, Archdale or Clemens, and they're searching for your business, you're hopefully, you're optimizing your Google business profile correctly. That's the hope that you're showing up in these search areas. So adding these is, the intent that you want to try and show up for these specific areas.
All right. Perfect. I love that. I got to make sure all of those things are on.
Yeah. You want to try and add those service areas where you're trying to be seen and be visible on. Okay, perfect. All right, next couple of sections here, and then I'll get back to the presentation and why this is all important and why I'm talking about all these sections. So the reviews, obviously, these are becoming more and more important. Want to make sure you're interactive with your reviews. You're keeping an eye on this. I'll touch on this in the tips and tricks in more detail. Same goes with photos. If you have photos, great. More photos, the better. You want to show the inside, the outside of your practice. These are definitely important as it relates to Google Business Profile Optimization. I'll touch on those in a little bit as well. And then your products. One thing I wanted to touch on here, specifically as it relates to this client. So as you can see, they do list pricing for specific products that they offer, services. Obviously, dental implant, you can see there's a price there. Definitely don't have to do this. If you're comfortable with it, you can, but something that this client has chosen to do just because they kind of have an average and they want to provide this information for prospective patients. So if you are comfortable with it, you can definitely do it, not required, but something I wanted to touch on as this is an option that this client did decide to provide prospective patients with. Looking at the services section as well, broken this up by category. So obviously their primary category is cosmetic dentist. You can see teeth whitening, whatever is related to that, put it under that category. And then as I scroll down here, dentist, a lot of the other categories are under the dental category as well. One thing I did want to note on this page as well is your first visit. So that's something we've decided to include as a service in here on the Google Business Profile, because we found that, prospective patients want to know what it's like to, be a new patient at your clinic. So this is just another kind of descriptor area where it shows, hey, this is what's going to happen on your first visit. Obviously, you only get 300 characters, so provide as much detail as you can, but something to note, just because people who are new, maybe new to the area, new to your practice, they want to understand what it's going to be like the first time they walk in your office. So something to to note there as well. And then obviously gum disease treatment under periodontist, pretty self-explanatory there. Last couple of things I want to touch on here, and then I'll talk about the importance and why I went through all of this. Your bookings tab. This is definitely important. You want to have a link here, whether that's a third-party booking that you utilize, or in this case, for our client, it goes directly to their contact page where it can patients can fill out the information, request an appointment, get in touch with the practice. So this can be a specific booking link that allows them to go to a site that books an appointment with you, or it can be the contact us form on your website. So something I wanted to touch on, and obviously this has a UTM as well. And then last two main things I wanted to highlight. As you can see here, as I scroll down, it has this highlight section. I feel like we get a lot of kind of questions or comments about this. So this is something that Google controls. We can't control it. You can't control it. It pulls this data from your Google business profile. So obviously for this client, it selected payment plans, emergency services, sedation dentistry. Nothing we can control here, but information you provide is going to be pulled into that highlight section. Something to look at as well. And then as I scroll down here, last thing I wanted to touch on is Google Business Profile posts. So as you can see here, there are posts which, a couple of years ago, a lot of people were saying, why are you spending time on this? No one looks at this. And then within the past, kind of year, there's been a resurgence for Google Business Profile posts, especially as it relates to AI and people spending more and more time on a Google Business Profile. So we kind of recommend, we do about, 2 to 6 of these posts a month for our clients, whether that's, if there's a discount you're running or, something seasonality wise, something you want to, let your patients know about for your practice. Include that info here, provide some updates. People want to, see that you're keeping up with this, and also Google really likes it. One example I wanted to show here, this client is open on Saturdays and Sundays for emergencies. So I included that here, just a nice little tidbit of information that you may not find directly on the website or anywhere else. So I included that information here. Good place to include, some one-off information for patients that may be looking for your business. Perfect. Okay. All right. Moving back to the presentation and why is this important and why did I just walk you through a Google Business Profile? Let me get back to the presentation. Okay. Perfect. Why did I spend all that time walking you through a Google Business Profile? You've seen that before. Here's the importance of it. So from these examples, I pulled these directly from Gemini, the large language model. And the way people are searching nowadays is a lot more conversationally when it comes to these AI tools. So we want to make sure all that information is filled out in the Google Business Profile so that when people are doing pretty specific searches, that information shows up. As you can see with these examples, what's a good dentist in Glendale, California that has, a free parking lot and accepts cash? You can see the answer right below, right? Those are details and attributes from your Google Business Profile that are pulling directly into these large language models. Another good example is, I want a dentist who has affordable dental implants. Please find me one for Nashville, Tennessee. And then it provides, an answer with a couple of different dental practices down below with some estimated costs. So a lot of the ways that people are searching these days as it relates to these large language models specifically, and sometimes in Google search with those AI overviews is a lot more conversational. So that's why it's important to have all these details out, because people are searching and finding your dental practices in brand new ways that they haven't before. Some more examples of these, provide me with a LGBTQ friendly dental office in Seattle, Washington. This one obviously touches directly on the Google Business Profile attribute. And then find me a dentist in Denver that has a Google Business Profile review rating of 4.5 or higher, pulling all those details from that Google Business Profile. So that's why it's really important to fill out all of those details on the Google Business Profile. So new patients, and Google can find that information and display it to them to increase, your chances of being seen and increasing those new patient numbers. Okay, another thing I wanted to touch on here, reserve with Google. As you can see from the example here, which was different from my client because they don't use a third-party booking service, is this book online big blue button, which is right below the save and share and call. The only way to have this book online big blue button show up is if you partner with these third-party booking services that Google works with through Reserve with Google. So it's those 5 right there: Flex Dental, Dental Intelligence, Dentrix, Price by Numbers, and JNAP. And those are some of the pricing for those. Those are averages. They, when I tried to find exact pricing, they have, packaging and different services that include things. So those are just kind of average pricing, but definitely something I wanted to touch on because I feel like get a lot of questions about this book online button and how do I get that? So that's the reasoning and the know-how behind that aspect of Reserve with Google. So if you're interested, that's the way to go about obtaining that. Okay, now to the best parts of this webinar, my 5 tips and tricks. So I'm going to go through all of these with you now. I touched on these earlier, but these are the ones that I feel like can definitely, are important to have as it relates to your GBP. So number 1 is photos. Any photos are better than no photos. People want to see what your dental office looks like. If they're new to the area or if they're looking for a new dental office, they want to see what's the inside look like, what's the outside look like. Take some photos with your iPhone camera. It's a high resolution camera on your iPhone. Take photos of the inside, the outside. Take some photos of your actual staff. They love to see, real people that are related to the practice. So I can't stress, enough photos. People love to get an idea of what the practice looks like. Second one I wanted to touch on, hours. So this is an interesting one. Local, keyword rankings fluctuate based on when you're open. So something to be aware of when you are, spot checking your keyword rankings and whatnot. If you're checking them, make sure you're checking when your business is open because they do vary. If your business is closed, the rankings will show differently than when your business is open. Definitely something to be aware of. And then also make sure your hours are 100% accurate and that your special hours are updated regularly. So this relates obviously to holidays, Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, the big ones. But then also if there's a random Friday in June where you have, Employee Appreciation Day, make sure that those are updated and those are accurate. Again, people and Google want to know when you're open and when you're closed and making sure that those are accurate. Number 3, practitioner listings. So if you have a practitioner listing, which is a Google Business Profile specifically related to the dentist, make sure that it is different from the business listing. You don't want to compete for the same service keywords as your business listing. So if your primary category for your Google Business Profile, business location is cosmetic dentist, and you have a practitioner listing, make sure that that main category is different, whether it be dental clinic or dentist. Just make sure you're not competing for the same keywords there because you want to be helping yourself and not competing against yourself. Number 4, UTMs, or as they actually are, stated, Urchin Tracking Module. What are these? I talked about these when I was walking through the Google Business Profile. These are really important to have on your links within your GBP. If you don't, all the traffic that comes from your Google Business Profile will default to Google/organic. And it's really important to know where people are finding your business from, especially because, if a lot of them are finding your business from your Google Business Profile, that's great. You can, you have that knowledge. You can make a note to make sure, hey, I want to make sure I'm providing updates to this, make sure everything is correct, and vice versa. If people are finding, more they're finding your business from your website and less from your Google business profile. That allows you to have better insight into, hey, where do I need to optimize? Where do I need to make changes? Where do I need to, kind of tweak some things? So really, it's just about having a better sense of where your patients are coming from. And these UTMs provide that. This will show up in Google Analytics. It'll provide you with, where exactly those people are clicking from and whatnot. So definitely something to be aware of and add on those links in your Google business profile. And then last but not least, reviews. Probably one of the most important aspects of your Google business profile or are your reviews. People love to look at the reviews. They love to see what other, actual people are saying about your practice and whatnot. And if you are able to, have a patient who posts a review with a photo and the specific service that they, received at your clinic, these are SEO gold. Obviously, this is kind of out of, your control in terms of, what people post and on their review, but these are, amazing. Google really likes those. People like to see, they're actually interacting and what the dental office looks like. So definitely be on the lookout for those. Encourage patients to, have reviews and provide a review for your dental office. And then in that same vein, as it relates to negative reviews, make sure you respond to negative reviews, in a timely manner. I know don't like to receive these. So make sure, I would say a good time frame is at least 24 hours. Within 24 hours, respond to those negative reviews. And remember, it's a time to showcase your business. So be polite in your response. People will spend a lot of time looking, if you have a lot of good reviews and then that, a couple negative, people will spend time looking at that negative review. So if you're showcasing your business and responding to that review and providing a polite, response, that's great. People are going to love that and respond well. And then also make sure, you're HIPAA compliant in those responses as well. Okay, perfect. Hopefully you took at least, one or two things away from this presentation today. Those are kind of the 5 tips and tricks that I wanted to highlight as it relates to the Google business profile. I wanted to thank Laura and Code for hosting this webinar. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. And also if you have, I know we'll make some time for questions here. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. If I don't know the answer to that question right away, not to worry, I'll get your contact info and follow up with you. I know it sounds like I know everything, but I don't. So thank you for taking the time to spend it with me today. And it's been great. And hopefully you got some information that you may not have known previously.
All right, I don't see any Q&A in the question box, but I know that, I have some questions. So talk to me about, so if, let's say your Google business profile, you have some reviews, you have a lot of reviews, but you haven't posted any kind of update or any kind of photo, does the AI view that as less relevant in a search result and what they provide to the searcher?
Great question. Yeah, that's a really good question. If you do have a lot of reviews, but there isn't a whole lot of, interaction or updates or photos with your profile, I would say obviously the strategy or optimization or, the best way to, provide a good Google business profile is to have a holistic strategy, which includes everything. So I would definitely make sure you are providing, updates and photos along with those reviews. Obviously Google, is going to, they like seeing reviews, but they also like to see updates, and that you have photos and that you're, a real dental office and that there's updates and whatnot. So I would definitely say, make sure you are providing those updates and reviews. It might not be necessarily less trustful, but if you do see like competitors are doing better than you in your area, and they have maybe a little bit less reviews, but they're providing updates and photos, definitely something to be aware of. So I would say provide those updates and provide some photos to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance to be seen by patients and in Google's good eye.
Right. So would you think that like, I don't know, like once every 2 to 3 months is enough? Like for like a photo on a Google business profile? Or is
Yeah,
it like something you
I
should
would.
do like monthly?
Yeah, no, so I would say as it relates to photos, obviously like the more photos you can provide, the better. You don't need to provide like I would say a monthly update on photos. But as long as you have, I would say probably every, 2 to 4 months is great. If you have some new photos or, have some new staff members or, there's a new piece of technology you got in your office, whatever that may be. I would say, every 2 to 4 months pop in a new photo in there, provide some updated information. I think that's a good it's a good kind of timeline, just to keep it a regular update there.
Right. All right. So what about like if you're in a really competitive market, you're in a really big city, is there something that you are able to do or implement like in your Google business profile to stand out amongst like the most competitive, in the most competitive area? Like,
Great question.
yeah,
I
what are you
love.
able to do there to kind of like pop?
Yeah, I love this question because I feel like we get this a lot, and the best way to look at this, and as it relates specifically to like SEO and ranking in Google business profiles and AI and GEO, whatever you want to call it, it's a holistic, it's strategy, right? There's not necessarily a silver bullet as it relates to this, providing really good, updates and making sure all the information is correct on there, and you're providing content to users that is actually helpful. So whether that be updated information on business hours, or if there's some sort of event as it relates to your neighborhood specifically that's going on, provide that updated information. There's not one silver bullet as it relates to SEO. It's definitely a holistic strategy, so you want to make sure you're kind of doing all of the different aspects as it relates to that to give yourself the best chance in those competitive areas. And I think that's kind of can be a misconception sometimes with SEO, is there's not necessarily a magic or silver bullet. It's just making sure you're doing all the right things consistently.
Right. Okay. Now, I know we talked about reviews.
Mm,
Now, what about like when there's bad reviews and there's things
yeah.
that, people say on there that may not always necessarily be true? I'll say, how quickly should like a business respond to that? I don't know, like if it gets buried after some time or
Mm,
kind of how
yeah.
that works best for them, how they can navigate that.
Yeah, great question. As I mentioned, kind of in the tips and tricks section, best practices is to respond, especially with a bad review, I would say within like 24 hours, if possible, because you want to, obviously, if someone had a bad experience, you want to respond to them on Google, make sure that, whatever happened, that you're trying to get it resolved, and that people are seeing that you're interacting and you actually care about your patients. So I would say, within 24 hours is a recommended time frame to respond. And then if you have, some older, bad reviews that are, maybe got pushed down in the pile, or whatever, you can still respond to those today. It doesn't hurt. Again, people like to see that you're interacting and you care about those patients. So definitely make sure that you're being polite and you're providing a good answer, because as I mentioned, this is a place to showcase your business. People look at those reviews, so you want to kind of put your best foot forward in that scenario.
Because I know that's always, a hot topic of conversation, I feel like.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah. And there are some options, if there's reviews that, you believe are, not correct, or, sometimes businesses will say, they'll get reviews from patients who've never even been there. So you can, report those reviews to Google, if they're not true, if they're not from a patient, and they will, remove those in some cases, if they find them to not be accurate. So yeah, it can definitely be a tricky topic to navigate, but always recommendation is to respond.
All right. Great. Well, thanks. That was lot of information in there.
Yeah.
And I was like writing down all my notes over here of little things that everybody can do. So we will be sharing the video on YouTube so that everyone can kind of catch up, and we'll be sharing it to the participants as well. I did want to let everyone know that, all of our upcoming events. This upcoming week, we have the mastermind on Thursday with Bev Wilburn and Zach Shelley. And then April 16th and 17th, we have Develop the Code at National Harbor. So I hope to see most of all of you there. So we will have Thursday evening, the Back in 10 podcast at 6 o'clock with networking dinner right after that. And then all of our courses will start on Friday. I do have that up on the screen for anyone that is not already registered. And then in July, we'll be in Orlando, and December, we will be in New Orleans.
And apparently, if you want to help us grow, we need reviews. Lots of reviews.
Right.
So go online and review us. I don't think we have a Google business page, but we certainly have Facebook, which you can do reviews on there. And we'll tell Lucas to set us up with a Google My Business page.
Can
Yeah,
do.
we'll get that ready too. I know. And so the next inner circle will be with Lucas's friend Rita. I was talking to her the other day. We're kind of adding on to this about SEOs and that kind of thing. That'll be on March the 31st. That's a separate registration, but that'll be out to all the registrants as well. And I know that hopefully we'll see Lucas soon at one of our events. I know we'll see Annalise. She'll be there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm hoping to get to one of them. So yeah, hopefully we'll see each other soon.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Hope everyone has a great St. Patrick's Day, has a good time. Let me pull this
Perfect.
up. Oh, where's my? Hmm. Let me hit this here. Oh, all right.